Today is June 17th, Wednesday, 2020. I have something that I want to say before I show this to my viewers pertaining to the events going on all over the world right now. And by the way, today is the anniversary date towards what went on in South Carolina whenever an individual went in there and basically slaughtered a group of people, a bunch of black people, while they was involved in praying. We want to remember these catastrophes that has happened and is still happening here in America and all over the world. But what I want to talk about right now is the fact that while I was out in New Mexico, and I spent a whole lot of time over in and towards the Rio Grande, which would be north of Taos, north of I think it's called I forgot the name of it, but Eagle something over there, where there's a big circle where you can drive around, like a 50-75 mile circle. And it's also where Doc Holliday and a bunch of gangsters hung out back in the day whenever they was up north of Taos. But while I was up there, you know, I got familiarized with various groups of people. And of course, New Mexico connects to the four corners of Arizona and Utah. And there's something like, give or take, about 30 different nationalities in New Mexico pertaining to Indian as well as Spanish tribes. And I got to finding out with Los Alamos being one of the oldest churches in the Western Hemisphere pertaining to the Spanish people. I got to finding out that there was a lot of still animosity about what had occurred 500 years ago, whenever old America went in and basically retransformed or retransfigurated that particular area. And of course, after the 1812 war, it sure enough got disproportionalized towards who had what authority and who had what ground, and what ground that people had that they was in control of versus ground that they wasn't in control of. But while I was up there, I found out that Albuquerque, New Mexico is probably one of the most transitioned areas, with not just gays and lesbians and transvestites, not just with your Indians and your Spanish people coming out of Mexico, coming into New Mexico, but also with the drug cultures out in LA, out in California, and basically being right there on the corridor of I-40. I found out that New Mexico was very, very unique in its qualities of geographics. New Mexico was very, very unique pertaining to its art. In total, I stayed up there for about 4 months. Done a lot of stay while I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. But I spent some time up in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and spent some time up in Taos, and spent some time up in Eagle's Fire and Angel's Nest, and all that up in the northern part of New Mexico, touching off onto the lower part of the Rockies, going into Colorado. I didn't realize that there was so many diversified cultures in New Mexico. That makes New Mexico a very, very unique place. in regards to the things that they believe in, the things that they teach, the things that they support, their ideology, and how that they view various things, what they eat. It is a wide variety of things that goes on in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, that the vast majority of the world, including those in Utah, really don't have a clue in the problems that occur in New Mexico. And I'm just not talking about Area 51 going down to the southern border, or Highway 10 that's actually on the south border of New Mexico that joins Texas as well as Arizona. But there's so much unique territory in New Mexico that to this day I am still very, very touched by, because they are a very compassionate people that want to do what is right for their culture and for their people. The things that you're fixing to see in regard to protesting does not represent the wholeness of New Mexico. I just want you to understand that these trying times that we're all living in right now can, yes, be diversified towards bringing out the best, but it can also be diversified towards bringing in the worst. I had a distant cousin on my grandmother's side, Jordan, that had a name of Graves, that was a policeman out in the Albuquerque, New Mexico area for years and years and years before he decided to retire. While I was out there, I did get an opportunity to speaking with him, but for some reason, after he'd done a background check on me, he decided to steer clear from me because he seen me as me being a hoodlum or an outlaw versus a good person because of all the garbage that had been posted online about me. But it is well known in the Albuquerque, New Mexico area because of their diversified area and all the drugs coming from either Mexico or coming from the east or coming from the west, basically all merging right there together on I-40. That the cops out there has a horrible, horrible time in seducing the lawbreakers, in seducing the people that want to do harm versus the people that want to do good. And because of it, Albuquerque has had a long list or a history of police brutality in regards of their actions to be able to contain that type of law and order. Albuquerque was the only place that I can actually say that I stayed 2 nights in a death camp, in a homeless shelter, to where I actually heard people gurgling and dying while I was laying right beside these people. Albuquerque was one of the cities that I found to be longing for a certain unity, to be longing for some sort of friendliness, but yet now being torn in all these different directions by all these different Indian tribes and all these different Spanish tribes where people live out there and basically do their own thing. You got a lot of people that live in New Mexico that are living off the grid. They do not have driver's license. They do not have a telephone. They do not have electricity in their name. They do not have the essentials that you and me are familiar with. And the reason why is because New Mexico is a place that, as long as you contain yourself in a proper form, ordinarily the authorities are not going to come looking for you way out in the middle of the hills somewhere, where they got to spend endless amount of hours, man hours, and endless amount of money just to be able to hunt down an individual. Let's say that was being hunted down for a child support or some other unlawful charge, but it wasn't what you would consider a violent charge. New Mexico has its variety, especially up around Taos, where Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld still have a place up into that area. And of course, Los Alamos has some of your super scientists there that are some of the most smartest people in the world. That's associated with Oak Ridge out here in East Tennessee, and associated with other laboratories that we have, 3 or 4 of the laboratories in America. So New Mexico is a very unique place. So don't judge what you're fixing to see off the characteristics of everybody must be like this particular group of people that they have apprehended in New Mexico. Once more, my heart goes out to New Mexico, because New Mexico treated me very fairly, and New Mexico treated me on a social scale of 1 to 10, a high 8 or a 9 towards their accommodations and their hospitality. It was a life-altering experience for me to go out to New Mexico and spend a whole summer up in the hills, and to stay in a homeless shelter there in Santa Fe, New Mexico, for about 6 weeks. It was a life-altering experience for the good. And going to little towns and experiencing their cultures towards what they teach and what they believe in, and how they associate their lives in bonding together as a unit. So please, whenever you watch this, don't judge everything and everybody off of what you're fixing to see. That's the part that I wanted to make reference to. Thank you for listening.
Look, that's a lot of money. It's a lot of it. We've seen a lot of money being thrown out by a lot of leaders out in the West, but that is a large figure targeted to very worthy universities there. New developments today in New Mexico after protests turned to mayhem Monday night. The Albuquerque Police Department now says 13 guns and 34 magazines were recovered from 5 people on the scene.
As you can see, your automatic assault rifles, your AK-47s, your ARs, to bring these type of devices to a friendly protest is counterproductive in their friendship and what they have. And I'm pretty sure this confiscation that they made here was only a tip of the iceberg towards what was actually there that day. Because, like I said, whenever you're going through what we're going through right now, it tips the tip of the iceberg to the point that that it can bring out the best in people, but remorsefully and sadly, it can also bring out the worst in people. Once more, New Mexico is a very, very diverse state. It is very diversified. It has multiple groups of people in it. That's probably got 25 or 30 different atmospheres, depending upon what part of the state that you're in, or what city that you're in. As far as it being friendlier than friendly, or people that wouldn't come to the door and answer it because they don't know you, but they don't understand you, and they don't want you to be on their property.
Comes after a man was arrested and charged with aggravated battery in connection with a shooting that erupted as demonstrators tried to remove a statue of a Spanish conquistador. A man was injured in that shooting. Now, members of an armed militia group called the New Mexico Civil Guard were also detained by police. The group's presence at the protest has raised alarm among some city and state officials. The militia has tried to distance themselves from the accused shooter, Stephen Baca. However, at the time, they did try to protect him as chaos intensified. Joining us now from our NBC affiliate in Albuquerque is KOB4 TV's Megan Abundis. She was covering the protest when the shooting happened. And Megan, just walk us through sort of how, as best you can, when this started to go from tense to chaotic.
Sure. I mean, this was scary, of course. This was publicized as a prayer gathering, and we saw a group of Native Americans blessing this ceremony. They were doing a prayer. It was quickly interrupted by a group of counter-protesters, and back and forth happened for a while there, and things quickly intensified. The minute a chain went around that statue, the emotion changed. During that time, we saw Stephen Baca was recorded on camera pushing down at least 2 protesters, pushing them to the ground. That's when we saw this scuffle happen, right? Baca was seen hit by a protester with a skateboard. He then, in turn, used pepper spray on the protesters, and that group kind of followed Baca down the street. It appeared that he was leaving. Baca was then seen on the ground. He fired his weapon, and that hit a protester in the stomach. We talk about chaos and mayhem, and this felt like that. People were running. People were taking cover. And that's when the police showed up. And my line of questioning over the last couple of days have been, what is the protest protocol in Albuquerque, and why didn't police intervene sooner? Police say officers were nearby, but they were out of sight. They were undercover. And once they saw pepper spray, they called for a bigger response team, and that was the riot police in Albuquerque. And that's when we saw ground control tactics being used. Pepper spray, tear gas, flashbang, and crowd control techniques. So we now know that those tactics used by police will be under review by a public oversight board, where the police officers were, how they responded, and the entire investigation, the shooting and the events that led up to it, will also be handed over to an entirely different entity of law enforcement in New Mexico. New Mexico State Police will take it over. APD says that they did that to ensure fairness and accuracy, and really, the chief admitted yesterday that no one can really agree on the best type of response when it comes to having police show up to protests. We've seen time and time again. Yeah.
We keep showing this cache of weapons that was confiscated. Whose weapons were there? It's our understanding these were a slew of weapons here, magazines and guns, and it was only 5 people?
It was 5 people. It was a group of people from New Mexico Civil Guard and Stephen Baca as well. They're essentially, New Mexico Civil Guard is a civilian militia, right? They're not affiliated with law enforcement. On social media, they tend to fall in line with more conservative values, and they often show up to protests in recent weeks heavily armed and with assault-style rifles. And they say their purpose is to help police in an emergency. They told me on Monday that they were there to protect the statue.
I know. I read a report where they were in this militia group works, or the police tries to work with this militia group at times. Is that right?
Sort of. It wasn't this group. It was a different type of group that was...
Basically, it's a bunch of vigilantes that want to play off towards acting like that they're for the good, the better of the good, towards working with police. The fact of the matter is, they are a malicious group. They're just one of thousands of malicious groups all over this country. And this particular militia group is well known towards becoming a radical in these type of activities. What I was telling you all ago, whenever you have America in crisis, it has a tendency towards doing one or two things. It will either pull out the best in people, or it will pull out the worst in people. And just so happens, what you're observing is basically the worst of New Mexico in regards to this malicious group that wants to visualize itself in standing up for the good of mankind, but are quick to the draw whenever it comes to bloodshed. And it's the same way on the border. It's the same way in Texas. It's the same way in New Mexico. You got many and many people that are tired of being violated, and they're basically taking the law into their own hands, of these type of people that are tired of being violated. Some of them work independently. Some of them work in groups. Some of them are known. Some of them are not so known. But they're all over America. And the more that we get further into this, the more that we're going to see various groups. It's going to turn into preppers, similar towards what the Davidians was doing down in Waco, towards hunkering down, becoming privatized, in waiting for Armageddon or the apocalypse to unfold here upon to the planet. A lot of these groups have good intentions, but a lot of these groups can have unintended consequences that can lead into catastrophic disasters.
Security. We now know that Albuquerque police have confirmed some scanner chatter for us. It was recorded that Albuquerque police officer referred to this New Mexico civil group as armed friendlies, and that in turn is now under investigation by Albuquerque police as well.
Megan Abundis, it's quite the story. You've been on top of it. We had your package the other day. It's
once more, Albuquerque has always had a long history in rootlessness type outlaws, and because of its rootlessness, it has had a long history of police abuse, because that's been the only way to be able to maintain law and order in a lot of these situations in the streets of Albuquerque. When you're dealing with people that are this messed up on drugs, when you're dealing with people that has this strong ethnic groups, passionate historical feelings about what went on in the past, you're going to deal with the extremist. And that's exactly what my cousin was dealing with towards being associated with law enforcement in Albuquerque during the time that he was there. And because he read up on my report, he immediately told me that if I come to his house, that he would contact the proper authorities, because he was retired at the time, but he still has access to police files. He told me that if I come to his house, that I would be apprehended and looked upon as being an outlaw. He let me know that before I come to his house, after him giving me instructions how to get to his house. I believe his name was Graves, but it may have been Ring, associated once more with my mother's people in Kenton, Tennessee, where they was originally from, and then they moved off whenever they was just teenagers over into the Albuquerque area and become associated with law enforcement. The person, Growth, that created the black hole in Los Alamos, New Mexico, he's no longer with us. He's now dead. That worked in the nuclear facility there and retired from Los Alamos Laboratory. But his daughter works for police violence in maintaining some sort of governing system within the system pertaining to police abuse. That's what she's now involved in, along with being an anti-nuclearist. I've associated myself with these people just a little bit. I've stood on the streets of Santa Fe, New Mexico, protesting with the protesters pertaining to anti-nuclear bombs. I've only been basically in 2 protests in my whole entire life. One of them was up in California, protesting with the 99 percenters against the 1 percenters, the wealthy and the rich, and protesting there in Santa Fe, working with a couple of different groups that was associated with the churches up there pertaining to anti-nuclear. I've only been associated with 2 different protest groups, and these are the things that I initiated because these are the things that I felt like that I needed to initiate myself in. But once more, don't judge just a small amount of affairs or a small amount of groups in the whole state of New Mexico, because I promise you the whole state of New Mexico is not like this at all. They're very, very friendly people, and they have very, very compassionate humanitarian empathies or sympathies for their citizens and for the world in general.
Good to talk with you about it and get your firsthand account as well. Megan Abundis with KOB4 TV, our Albuquerque affiliate. Thanks very much.
Now we're going to fast forward it real quick on another story that I wanted to brush up on. That I found it to be very disheartening of the anniversary day today. If I can find it real quick.
Relation to the CDC guidelines.
And it don't look like that I am, so
we'll warn against large.
We'll go directly into what Mr. Biden is saying today towards ending this program. Once more, please listen.
As long as he's going to allow this to happen, but he's ready to do it as long as, notwithstanding CDC guidance, as long as the people showing up sign a waiver promising they'll not hold the campaign liable. Donald Trump's failure to fight the coronavirus with the same energy and focus that he uses to troll his enemies on Twitter. It's cost us lives and is putting hope for an economic recovery at risk. Job numbers and retail sales were better than expected in May, and that's great news for the country. But now Donald Trump's desire to declare victory and be done with it is only going to imperil the continued progress we have to make. Our economy is still sputtering, with more than 20 million people unemployed, and no clear guidance from the federal government for what businesses need to do to reopen safely, efficiently, and generate a strong recovery. No, this isn't a debate about whether to reopen. It's about how we make reopening work for everyone. The employees at the White House, they get daily COVID-19 tests. They know they're safe before they go to work, and they know their coworkers are safe. They have the confidence to resume their lives. But workers across the country aren't asking for daily testing. They're just asking for regular, reliable access to tests. Don't they deserve that? So it's not that Donald Trump doesn't recognize the importance of testing. They said he's not up to the task or doesn't care. And now he's seemingly decided he doesn't even want to try. But just like he couldn't wish COVID-19 away in March, just like he couldn't tweet it away in April, he can't ignore it away in June. So I have some basic questions for President Donald Trump. What are you going to do to make sure every worker has access to regular testing so they have the same confidence to go into a store or go back to work that White House staffers have? Why are you leaving schools and child care centers to navigate the uncertainty all on their own without an effective guidance and resources that they need to protect the kids and their communities? Why don't you enforce the OSHA standards for worker protection during this global pandemic? Why is it the Mainstream Lending Program, created more than 2 months ago by the Congress to help struggling small businesses, only open for registration to lenders 2 days ago and still hasn't distributed a single penny? Why don't you just close the names, Mr. President, of the businesses who received a total of $500 billion in taxpayers' funding? Why are they being hidden? How many cronies got bailouts? How many donors? How many big businesses didn't need it? What business had to shut down because they were denied funding in April? What businesses didn't get special approval that others got by a nod from the top? Why did you get rid of the watchdog, Mr. President? Why did you get rid of the watchdog appointed to oversee every dollar distributed, an inspector general? Why did you get rid of that person? The Congress passed. What are you trying to hide? It's a bad management on top of bad planning, on top of neglect.
Bad deal.
It's totally unacceptable for a great nation like ours.
Bad deal.
Folks, here's the truth. The pandemic is still here. It's going to be here for the foreseeable future until we get it under control or until we have safe and proven, widely available vaccine. COVID-19 is a fact of nature. We have to deal with this virus and everything that comes with it. We have to deal with it head on, honestly. Tell the people the truth. Paraphrase Franklin Roosevelt in the Depression. The American people can handle anything. Just tell them the truth.
Exactly.
Can't deal with it the way you're doing it. The only way to deal with it, Mr. President, if we put in the work, investing in building a dynamic, resilient economy and health system, capable of getting and then staying ahead of new outbreaks. We have the capacity and the resources to do that. I've laid out baseline steps of what needs to be done, from make it work checklists for successful, accountable recovery that I put out back in early April, to the steps for a strong reopening that I released last week. It's not rocket science. Granted, I have incredible scientists advising me on almost a daily basis on how to proceed, but it's not rocket science, it's common sense. It's straightforward. And that's why this is perhaps the greatest indictment of Donald Trump's complete, compelling lack of leadership. He wasted months and months and months passing the buck, blaming everyone else, refusing to act when he should have been preparing our country for a long-term response and building up our resiliency to respond to future flare-ups. Yet, we still don't have a comprehensive system for collecting COVID-19 case data. These are the basics. He should have been preparing us to weather the valleys and peaks of this virus. He should have been working to shore up the vulnerabilities in our healthcare system that have been laid bare in this crisis, and he's trying to eliminate in court. We should have been working to bridge the inequities and strengthen the cracks in the foundation of our economic system that have exposed for everyone to see. He hasn't done any of it. Because of the depths of Donald Trump's failures, this pandemic will continue to be worse for all Americans and much worse for Black and brown Americans. We're getting hit the hardest. Folks in communities like Darby Burr and Yaden, Donald Trump thinks that if he puts his head in the sand, the American people will too. But it doesn't work that way. Not when hundreds of people are still dying every day and millions are unemployed, wondering how in God's name they're going to keep the lights on and food on the table. Not when workers are weighed down with worries about their safety or what happens if they get sick. And there are the steps that we need to be taking now to steer us steadily and strongly in the right direction, see us through this time, to make a more resilient future. They're all available. First, we have to do everything we can to avoid deadly spikes in the infections as people begin to go back out into the world. We're not that much better prepared today for the run of cases that overfills our intensive care units than we were 3 months ago. Second, we have to help give people the assurance and precautions that are necessary to restart the economy with confidence. If Americans lose what faith they have left, what little faith they have left in the government's ability to manage this pandemic, we'll see much deeper and longer lasting economic impacts than with even greater repercussions for people's well-beings. Mr. President, don't leave the American people to face this threat on their own with no guidance, resources, or leadership from the federal government. Don't let support from the CARES Act expire next month while people are still hurting. Don't leave our frontline workers exposed without the resources they need, and don't waste any more of our time, Mr. President. The American people need confidence of clear guidance, grounded in science that's going to allow them to resume their daily lives. American businesses need the support of the federal government to continue to backstop them through this phase of reopening. And workers need assurances that their health is your first concern. Americans need a president who will put the American people first, not his or her own ego. America needs a president who will do the work. I'm ready on day one after more than 3 years in office. Why isn't Donald Trump ready? Mr. President, wake up. Get to work. There's so much more to be done. Thank you.
That is Joe Biden in Darby, Pennsylvania. He said the president is acting like he does not care about the coronavirus and called it the greatest indictment of his lack of leadership. Biden also said that Donald Trump is not the wartime president that he is fashioning, saying the president is taking no responsibility for the virus and that his decisions have cost lives already and might cost more lives in the future. He addressed the president's comments that if we did not test, we would not have cases, saying the president ignored the facts. Biden also commemorated the 5th anniversary of the shooting at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston and talked about how many Americans are recognizing how dangerous it is to be Black in America. Chuck, I just want to get your reaction to that speech.
Well, I want to get on the substance first. What I think when you think about the larger message that he was trying to deliver, it's about competency, right? Wake up! Why are you not ready after 3 years there at the end? And I think, frankly, that is a very safe place to be when you're talking in a swing state, right? When you're looking at these voters that maybe ideologically center right, even perhaps in some of these parts of Pennsylvania. And so getting at tackling Trump on a competency front, not really sitting here going, get the basics right. Just tell us the truth about what we're facing here. That he wasn't creating a left-right prism. There wasn't it really was more of an indictment on leadership in a time of crisis. Now I want to address a little bit of this sort of how it played. I think, it's interesting. It felt to me, it's better than him doing these events virtually, but it felt to me he was speaking more to the room than speaking to the camera. And I say that it's interesting. Yeah. Clearly the campaign was concerned about the camera. Why? They had a teleprompter out there, right? You and I both know when the prompter is up, they want to make sure they have good, clean shots. They want good shots of him speaking to camera. Maybe they're perhaps filming a TV ad. Perhaps it's for this. And so with that, at the last two lines that he gave, you felt like had the room had more people in it, he probably feeds off of it better.
Yeah. And that's what Donald Trump has used to his advantage when he is in a crowd. It's part of the reason why he wants to get out, because he feels like when he is in front of a crowd, he's projecting something, and he feels like that is a way to draw more voters in. That being said, I've talked to a lot of Democratic strategists, but also like former Obama officials about what Biden needs right now. And they say that when you look at the poll numbers and you look at the way the president is responding to this crisis and the way the president puts his foot in his mouth almost every other day, what Biden needs right now is not any unforced errors. What he needs right now is to come out and look competent, come out and look coherent, come out and have a plan and make it clear that he is somebody who will come in and get things done and not force a cleanup every single day, which is what these Democrats say the president is doing on a daily basis. Right now, it's more about let Donald Trump go out there and say these wild things. Let him be his biggest enemy. Let him run against himself in November, and Biden will be the contrast as long as he doesn't make any unforced errors. Chuck, let's bring in NBC News correspondent Mike Memley. Sorry for that delay. It's tricky when we have these setups. Mike, so let's talk about a little bit about what the Biden team, from your conversations with him, were hoping to do today.
Well, Katie, I think as you were just outlining, this is not one of those elections, I think, where most Americans doubt that there's a difference between the two candidates. And as it relates to the two biggest issues at the moment, the economy and the pandemic, two separate but certainly interconnected issues, there probably couldn't be a wider gulf between what the president thinks and what the former vice president thinks about where we are heading in this country. And I think the clear evidence of that, in part, is the fact that the Trump campaign is encouraging us to take his remarks live. But there was a memo from the campaign yesterday saying that they think that Joe Biden has been overly pessimistic about the economy, that he's been an alarmist about the pandemic, and they want to draw attention to that. But as you just heard from the former vice president, he thinks he's squarely in line with where a president should be right now, speaking the truth to the American people about the fact that this pandemic, as he put it, is not going to go away. You can't wish it away, tweet it away, ignore it away at this point. And as you indicated as well, he's not doing as many public events by any means as you would ordinarily be doing. He has been very careful in sort of managing the campaign, his access to the public. This is an interesting test. As you can see, there's still some residue of crowd behind me. One test for Biden was whether he might be tempted to step out and greet some of the many people who have come out on the street to deal with him. But the Biden campaign has felt since day one that Biden does best when the stakes of the election are raised, and that was certainly what they hoped to accomplish today with the kind of address you heard the former vice president giving.
Hey, Mike, tell us about the crowd inside, how it was set up. We saw a little bit of the distancing there, but I got the sense that the vice president felt very far away, and in some ways it felt like he was more worried about the room than the visual.
Well, I mean, the thing about Joe Biden, having covered him as long as I have, is no one, I think, responds to the audience in front of him as much as any other politician I've covered, certainly, than Joe Biden does. And so I think one of the difficult things for the campaign is, as he often feeds off the energy of a crowd, what do you do when you have an audience as small as you did today, with very clearly socially distant markings on the floor? It was basically the Darby City Council and a few other guests here today. And so he feeds off the reaction of an audience, but certainly the campaign knows he's playing to the larger audience. We know the pressure they've also been putting on networks like ours to be taking his remarks live, feeling we're at the point in the campaign that needs to happen. And so, otherwise, we talked about this last week, Chuck. The kinds of events that I think we're going to get used to seeing are what he did before this stop one town over here in the town of Yaden, which is smaller roundtable discussions where he can have a personal connection with, like somebody he did at the first stop, somebody who lost a family member to the COVID pandemic, as he put it, joining that fraternity of grief that they have to share. That's, I think, what we're going to tend to see more often than not over the next couple weeks, at least, Chuck.
And of course, Mike, if we were still at the hotline tracking what states are you going to visit the most of the swing states, clearly Pennsylvania, thanks to location to Wilmington, is going to have probably the most Biden campaign events between now and Election Day. Location, location, location. Anyway, Mike Memoli in Darby, Pennsylvania. Mike, thank you, sir. And we are minutes away from the Fulton County District Attorney's announcement on potential charges for officers involved in the shooting death of Rayshard Brooks. Katie.
He is certainly up here at the Chuck. As you can see, this crowd behind me is growing in size and is growing louder as we get closer to this decision. There is a certain intensity in the air and a certain energy, perhaps anxiety over what will happen in the next few minutes when the district attorney announces his decision on these charges. Will he move forward with a murder charge? Will he bring no charges? Will it be against one officer or will it be against both? These are the decisions we are waiting to hear. We know this district attorney is taking this seriously. He knows his office is under a national microscope right now, and that lots of people are watching his decision-making to see what is next, because Atlanta has obviously been a hub of outrage in recent days. And the past 2 nights in Atlanta have been very peaceful with demonstrations and protests as they await this decision. Will it be a third night? That's something that this decision may dictate. People may be responding, we expect, in minutes. And obviously here, where a lot of people have chosen to gather and pay respects to Rayshard, is certainly going to be an area where a lot of this will be taking place. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that as this decision comes down in the next few minutes.
All right, Katie Beck, thank you. I imagine you're going to be put to work here in a few minutes. So,
toward these officers, but this really has set a line in this community. People wanting action. Of course, you have all these things that have happened across the country. Now here in Atlanta, this is a place known for the civil rights movement. And we heard the mayor talk about how she felt when she watched the video, that she was rooting for Rayshard Brooks, and she wanted him to be able to get home. That's been the big question. Why did it have to end this way? So the big conversation is about the taser, whether or not it was considered a deadly weapon or not. These are things that we're going to have to ask Paul Howard when he arrives here. But we're told at 3 o'clock he will announce whatever his findings are. We know investigators have been working on this since after the shooting. So it'll be interesting to see how they move forward, especially in a community filled with so much pain.
Let me just stay with you quickly, Ryan, because it's my understanding, of course, we've heard from the Rayshard Brooks family. They want these officers in jail, right? Period, full stop. But you have some intel on the morale at APD. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I've talked to 12 officers over the last 24 hours or so, black, white, male, female, longtime veterans of the police department, and they're saying they have mixed messages about how they should act when a shooting occurs, how that conversation should go when someone grabs a taser. That's happening throughout the community. We can see online that people are having all-out arguments about what should happen next. What I can tell you, though, is go out to that site, that Wendy's, and listen to the pain. The fact there's a steady flow of people going every hour to that Wendy's. You know people in this community want answers, and they are demanding it at this point. Brooke?
Let's go to that Wendy's, to Diane. And Diane, what are folks telling you? What are the emotions they're sharing?
So, Brooke, I think it's kind of what Ryan was describing there is this collective breath holding that's been happening in Atlanta over the past few days since District Attorney Paul Howard announced that he thought he would be coming to a decision by about midweek, saying that Wednesday would be the earliest that he would make a decision on charges. A lot of people here in Atlanta simply heard, I'm going to make a decision on Wednesday, and they've been waiting since this morning to hear from that district attorney. He talked about those 3 potential charges that he was considering: murder, felony murder, and voluntary manslaughter. I've been speaking to people, and I'll step out of the way and let you see what's going on. This particular protest was actually happening and scheduled before they heard that this was going to take place at 3 o'clock today. So they were out here, as they have been every single day. I've been out here for days now. They have been gathering here in this parking lot, not just to demand justice, but also to reflect on what is currently happening across the country and here in Atlanta. My producer, Pamela Kirkland, a man was sitting here, she said, who just sat there and sobbed for about 10 minutes as he looked at the memorial that had been put in place for Rayshard Brooks. And a lot of the people that we've spoken with say this isn't just about Rayshard. We want justice for him and his family, but this is about being black in America. And this is so much bigger than that. And so they've been listening to officials here in Atlanta. Now they're waiting to see whether or not they're essentially going to put their money where their mouth is. Now, I also have talked with the police union, and the police union has said that if charges are announced today, Brooke, they feel that it is at best premature, at worst political. The union representative who will represent those officers if they are in fact charged today said that they don't believe that those 2 officers have received due process. They don't believe that a full investigation, which they deserve, has been done at this point. And they kind of attacked District Attorney Howard and even Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, saying that they were more concerned with politics than due process. But people here at this Wendy's who have been coming out every day, people who have been marching in the streets morning, noon, and night for almost 3 weeks now in Atlanta, say that they feel like unless they get justice, Atlanta's not going to get peace. They're going to keep marching in the streets. And I want to be very clear that it has been overwhelmingly peaceful in Atlanta for those 3 weeks. There were a few nights, a few hours of those nights, and you can see behind me the result of that, where things got out of hand. But for the most part, people have been marching, they have been demonstrating, they have been posting up in front of the Capitol, in front of the district attorney's office, in front of the federal buildings to make sure that they are heard. And that's going to continue no matter what the charges are. They're still going to be in the streets. Every single demonstrator I've spoken with has said, we're not giving up. We're going to stay in the streets until we get justice, because justice isn't just for Rayshard. Justice they want for all of the people who live in Atlanta, especially the black and brown men and women who live here.
And of course, one piece of this is the charges. The other is a conviction. Diane, thank you so much. And we'll come back to you for reaction from folks in the community as soon as we get the news coming down from the DA, Paul Howard. So let's go straight to CNN senior legal analyst Laura Coates. And Laura, help us put this in perspective before we watch the DA. I mean, isn't this ultimately about the threat, the immediate threat that Rayshard Brooks posed these officers, and also the taser?
It absolutely is. And of course, we've seen the video. We know the confrontation was far longer than the moment from the struggle ensued until he ran away and shots were fired. But from the DA's perspective, they're going to look at the moment in time that the struggle really began and whether or not the officer's shooting was justified. Now, to do that, they have to look at not only Georgia law, but also the officer's police manual. Georgia law obviously takes precedence, and what it actually says is you can use lethal force if you believe, essentially, that lethal force may be used against you or somebody else, and you are in reasonable fear of harm. Now, when we talk about reasonableness, this is why this is a difficult case for the DA to come to a conclusion on. It really is a subjective interpretation by the officer. And so that's where the police manual comes in, and why the police unions, as Diane and Ryan were speaking about, have had a lot to say about this issue, about what he should or should not have done. But ultimately, remember, totality of circumstances matters here. They were aware he did not have a weapon. They patted him down. They knew who he was had his license. They also knew that he was in some form or fashion intoxicated. All of these things should go to the officer's ability to make an assessment about the person's lethal threat. And finally, they know full well that it was a taser. It was bright yellow and shiny. It was not a gun that he was holding, and it had been discharged at some point and a distance away from them. So all this comes into play. Did the officer react because he believed lethal force, or because he thought he could not catch up to the person? Obviously, the latter is no reason to shoot.
Laura, stay with me. I want to bring in another voice, Joey Jackson, CNN legal analyst. And Joey, what will you be listening for here?
So there's a few things that are going to go into the analysis real good to be reviewed. The first is they're going to look and examine, was the officer in immediate fear of his life or serious physical injury? Very critical point. Number two, they're going to assess whether the force the officer used, deadly.
That's a bad technical problem right there. I don't know. I ain't never seen nothing quite that bad. I'm going to end this right here pertaining to Joe Biden speaking. Once more, the violence needs to stop. It's one thing to speak your piece. It's one thing if you want to get out and hold a sign, protest, but do so in a lawful, dignified way. Because whenever mean-spirited people that want to bring guns and knives and clubs, and they want to do things to disrupt peace, all they're doing is holding this event hostage and trying to turn it into something that it never was supposed to have been turned into, pertaining to a movement. Hopefully this movement will resort to more fairness. Hopefully this movement will turn into the acknowledgement of understanding that yes, black lives matter. All lives matter. We need to start treating people with more compassion and more dignity, but at the same time, you have to look at both sides of the perspective. Whenever the police officers cannot no longer do their jobs to the point of somebody being either disruptive or somebody in violation towards not doing what the police officer has asked them to do, you have to look at both sides of the perspective that to ignore the authority of what the authorities have towards them being police officers, towards avoiding an arrest, even if it's my arrest. When you do this, you're now playing by a completely different set of rules, which, no, does not give any police officer to take somebody's life simply out of a vendetta, a grudge. But whenever a person resists arrest, they automatically put themselves at risk towards not knowing how that particular police officer, him or her, is going to respond and react to that type of resistance. Because whenever you resist arrest, that in and of itself is a charge. Even if you don't feel like that you should be charged with that particular charge that they're trying to charge you for, just the fact of resisting arrest can lead to a completely different charge. So when one does this, him or her, it's basically a new set of rules that automatically come into play because of this type of resistance. And if we did not have police officers who was willing to put their lives on the line towards conducting law and order, one has to ask themselves the simple question, what type of a society would we have if we didn't have law and order? That's the very reason why God destroyed the old world, the world during the time of Noah. There was no law and order. There was no justice. There was not a mandated rule. It was chaos. And God put an end to it. Just like God put an end to Sodom and Gomorrah. In basically doing the exact same thing. And that's exactly what God will do again. If man wants to continue to shake his fist in the face of God by daring God, that's exactly what God will do again if deemed necessary. That's the part that kind of freaks me out. That's the part that frightens me, is that we are steadily edging towards chaos, anarchy. We're steadily edging towards the very same type of scenario that happened during Noah or Sodom and Gomorrah. And when this occurs, why should we think that God is going to do anything any differently in today's society than what He done in societies before us? We're only deceiving ourselves, folks. We're only deceiving ourselves in thinking that we are exempt in the 21st century compared to other generations and other cultures that has experienced other bad events that has occurred in their culture. We're only deceiving ourselves because ultimately He's the one that's got the power. He's the one that's got the authority. Now you can shake your fist in the face of God all you want. No one's going to stop you from doing that. But ultimately, in the end, what God will do, He'll make you regret that you was disobedient. He'll make you regret that you didn't listen to the prophets and the messengers that He has sent forth to try to bring justice and peace into society. He'll make you regret that you did not be obedient. And that's where we are right now in these different stages that continue to escalate and grow worse and worse and worse, regardless whether it's episodes like we just seen in New Mexico or episodes that Joe Biden was talking about pertaining to the coronavirus, or episodes happening right now in the Atlanta court system, pertaining to this ruling that is fixing to be handed down to the American people. This, in and of itself, of this decision, this ruling, could very well determine whether or not Atlanta is going, to continue to be on a peaceful protest, rallying for justice, or rather not Atlanta flares up like they have in Minnesota and other places of the country to the point that society just becomes unhinged. And let's pray that that's not what happens. And obviously this is going to be a lengthy thing pertaining to seeing them come out with this decision. Obviously they're probably looking at all their alternatives and all their best alternatives towards what they should and shouldn't do pertaining to a legal perspective. So because of it going to be drawn out in such a long, lengthy form, we're going to go ahead and cut it off for right now, and hopefully before too much time, we will know the end results of whether or not the GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigations, are going to pursue this as an unlawful act to the degree of charging either one or two of these officers with murder, or whether or not they're going to wave it off like it was some sort of a pre-existing accident, knowing that it wasn't. So because of that, because of the length of this video, we're going to shut it off. And as we say, and we continue to say, good luck to all of us, coming from the Windmill Ministries. God bless and shalom.